Hello and welcome back to my RC channel. I'm AndyRC and today I'm going to be checking out the awesome TS195. Now this is a 195mm racing quadcopter and I'm going to do a build video, but I'm going to be doing it a little bit differently. Rather than showing you every solder joint and every screw that has been fitted, I'm going to do it in stages and just explain to you how I'm doing the build, but this one should be a really easy build. Now it looks like it's a carbon fiber frame, and it is kind of. Can you see around here we have this gold, so it's got carbon fiber on the top of the arms and all these plates, but then it has got wood in the middle. Now that means that it's not going to be as strong, however it is going to be more lightweight hopefully by the end of this. So it's a complete kit. You do need a receiver and a battery, and also I'm going to be using a GoPro session on the top here as well. But let's take a look at what you get. So, by the way, you get two types of arms with this kit. Can you see there? You get the flat arms and these ones that sort of bend down, and I'm not going to be using these at all. I think this is just going to cause a nightmare for tuning, altering the height of motor, so I'm going to go with the flat arms here. So we have motor protectors here, and then we have this little stack here where the camera fits, and also the receiver can go in here as well. So let's just scroll down and take a look at some of the specs here. So as I say, 195mm, so it takes a 5-inch blade, and you can get it in gold or silver. Now they have sent me the gold one, but I prefer the silver one personally. I think it looks more sleek. So it says here that they are 2205 2600 kV motors, so it's an all-in-one ESC board, 20 amp with a max burst rate of 40 amp. We have got a CCD camera, which is nice, with a 2.8mm lens. This is going to take a 4-cell or a 3-cell battery. And if we just scroll down here, so this is the all-in-one ESC board there. You're given an HD3 connector, and then you're given the awesome F3. This is the same flight controller that is in the UB quadcopter, so it's a F3 flight controller that comes with Betaflight flash to it, and it has got a VTX built into it. So you can see there that it says VTX with 25mW, 200mW and 400mW adjustable power. So it has got a button on it there, so you can change the channels between the different 40 channels. And yep, so pretty nice setup. The only problem I see with this is it has a competitor. So this is a kit that you have to build, and that's why I think it's interesting. That's why I want to make a video on it. But if we check out the price, £154, it doesn't have an on-screen display, and I think that will lose a lot of people's interest because it's become a standard now, on-screen displays, really. So we just have this VTX and flight control, and the camera plugs into the flight control at the front, and this also has a nice connector that connects straight to the flight controller as well. I think a reason to get this would be to have a go at building one yourself, because we're quite spoiled these days and don't need to do that. But I do think it's important to build a quadcopter yourself, and this will be a fairly straightforward build because it's an all-in-one system. I think the only things that we're going to have to solder here is the XT60 connector and the ESCs there, and you also have to solder on the SMA adapter as well, and we will take a look at that a little bit later. And of course another reason to get this is it's going to be a very lightweight setup, and we'll check out how light a little bit later. But let's go and check out the other things that I'm going to need. So I'm going to be using a X4R receiver. I will have to flash it with the EU version of the firmware because I've got an EU Taranis, and you can buy that here. And I'm also going to be using Fat Shark goggles as well. and those are very expensive from Gear Best, but these are the HD3s. So this is the bottom plate that the quadcopter is based on. So the arms all sort of link into each other here, and one thing that is important to notice, can you see that the arms have got a hole here, and it's only on one side of the arm, so you have to make sure that the arm is on the correct way. And then we have got all these 2mm hex screws here, and those sort of screw into these jointed aluminium bolts there, and these are short screws, and I just used this hex driver to get those in. And then we have some longer screws here going through to this bottom plate here, and we have some small collets that sit there, so sort of, you know, sort of aluminium standoffs, should I say. And then on top of here is where the all-in-one ESC board is going to fit. You can see I've already installed the battery strap on here, because once everything sits on top of here and stacks up, it's going to be difficult to get the battery strap in, so I've done that. So the next thing to do is to get the motors on and the all-in-one ESC board, and then solder all that up, and also the XT60 connector as well. So I've gone ahead and done all of those things. You might notice that I haven't used the motor protectors that you're given in this kit, and that is just my preference. I don't like to use them, and they look like they might weigh a bit, 4 of those, and every gram is expendable in my opinion with a build like this. Yeah, but you can see I've cut the motor wires short and soldered them direct to the ESC board. It's actually more difficult soldering them straight when the ESC is in the middle, but I've gone ahead and done that. I guess we can use BL Halley Suite to reverse the motor direction. Speaking of the motor direction, you'll notice that we have 2 silver spinners here and 2 black ones here. Usually it's the case that the black spinner on builds is the clockwise motor, not the case with this one. So we want the spinner to tighten in the direction that the motor is spinning, and that is the case for the silver, and then the black is counterclockwise there. I've also cut to length this XT60 connector as well, and then if we look underneath, you will notice there's only 2 screws in each motor, and that's because they haven't provided enough screws to put all 4 in, which I think is a bit of an oversight, unless they just intended 2 screws going in. But I would recommend thread lock with just 2 screws, or just make sure they're really tight, and every time you fly it, double check that. And I've also put cable ties over the motor wires as well to make it look neat. So the next thing to do is to fit the flight controller on top of these longer collets or standoffs here. So those just screw into the longer screw that goes through here. And then this is the awesome all-in-one flight controller. Now I have added a little buzzer, so you can see there it doesn't come with one, and I've soldered it direct to the board, which isn't something that I usually recommend, because if that gets pushed, then it could lift the solder pads up, but I haven't got a lot of room in this build, so I've decided to do that. I've also added this SMA connector as well, so this isn't soldered out of the box. You're given a few options. You've got this one that comes out of the side, and then they give you a vertical one as well, which is in there, so it can sit up there. My problem with both of these options is that in a crash, the flight controller is going to take some of the impact there, and again, this could even break the board, or at least lift these solder pads up. So what I've decided to do is use this SMA connector coming out the side, and I've just soldered in the ground and signal pin on one side, making sure that I didn't solder it all the way across, so that if it does lift up the pads, then it may just lift up these ones here, and I can still use the ones at the back. Now in this kit they have given this here, which is sort of like an SMA extension. However, I can't see where you would be able to place this, so the idea is that that solders on there, and then this gets screwed into somewhere, maybe in this top plate here. So I've built the top plate up already, very easy. We have this base plate here, and then we have 4 standoffs that go in here. I just need to put the other 2 in there, and then we have the camera which just wedges in there, so 2 standoffs here. Now they haven't given a screw for the camera either, however it does wedge in there very tight. I can barely move it, so that is just gonna stay in there like that. But can you see there, I'm gonna be using this X4R receiver. And I guess the idea was with this is to maybe drill a hole there and have this sticking through, but there's no room for my receiver if I do that. I did think of maybe putting some epoxy and have it underneath like that coming out, because this is just carbon fiber and wood, so in a crash then it would be this that breaks rather than the flight controller. But in the end I just thought I'll just stick with the standard SMA and hope that it doesn't break. So that is going to sit on the top there, and then there's going to be some screws going down there, and then I've got various different leads. So this lead here is going to go into the ESC board there, and then it's going to come round and piggyback into the flight controller there. So I need to put all of that together, and then also stick this on the top. I tell you what, very easy build this. Probably taken me, what, an hour and a half so far, and it's almost done, so that's pretty cool. So here is the finished machine. It looks quite snazzy, I think. So I've added the pod on the top there with these standoffs, and I have plugged the camera in, so the camera goes in down here at the front, and I've also got my S-Bus receiver plugged into the side as well. So they give you 2 cables for this. They give you this one here, which is PPM, so the signal wire is on the 3rd pin, and then the S-Bus wire is on the 4th pin there as well. Now, bit of an oversight on my part, but where I stuck that buzzer is where one of the standoffs goes, so I've just got one standoff in here, but I tell you, it's absolutely rock solid. But if I was to do this again, I would just run a wire underneath there and put my buzzer up here, because there's actually loads of room. But I think it looks pretty smart like that, and this isn't moving at all, so I think that is fine. I'm still worried about this. This seems very weak here. One thing that I did do is I decided to use nylon screws on here instead of the metal ones. I just thought that gave a little bit more play if this was to break, but probably not. I think there needs to be a better solution than that. But I've got my X4R in here and I've cable tied it down. I've also put some heat shrink around the antenna there so it doesn't go into the props. And yeah, it's actually a very lightweight setup, which is what I thought it was going to be. So I'm using these Taranis Graphene 4S 1300 milliamp batteries. And with the GoPro added and everything, it's 503 grams. So I'm really interested to see how it's going to perform, because that is pretty light. But the way that I have set this up, so I got my Taranis here, very similar to my other model, so I have set it to arm on this switch. I've got my buzzer on this switch, and I've got the modes on this switch. I've set it up to have acro, then angle, then acro, and also air mode. So I've called it the TS195 there. And you can see I'm in D16 mode, and I've also got no pulses set for the failsafe as well, so I've set the failsafe. And then if I go over here, you can see there I've got my arming on channel 5, mode on channel 6, and buzzer on channel 7, and then that is repeated here in the mixer as well. Now I'm going to take you into Betaflight, but of course I need a way to FPV with this, so I'm going to be using my Fat Shark Dominator HD3 with the Fat Shark Diversity receiver. I'm going to be using this Triumph antenna today, and I'm also going to use the Invader patch antenna from AndyRC. Okay, so here we are in the Betaflight configurator. Now it does come flashed already with Betaflight, which is nice. So I've plugged the quadcopter into the computer via a USB cable. I haven't got the battery connected. It does need to be connected for the receiver to power up, but I have already put the props on, so I'm not going to power up the battery, but I will connect to it to show you the settings. So I'll just enable expert mode here. So you want to make sure it's on a level surface and calibrate the accelerometer. I've already done that. Into the ports. So the receiver is switched on the UART 3 there, and we have UART 1 on for the USB. Into the configuration, and it's set up as Quad X, no board alignment here. I've got one shot 125 enabled, motor stop off. I've got the minimum throttle set really low at 1039. I did that in the motors tab, which I'll talk about a little bit later. Max throttle set to 2000 for the Taranis, which is fine. Then if we come down here, so I've got serial based receiver selected for the X4R and S bus here. I've got the VBAT enabled, so the VBAT does come through from the flight controller and the ESCs, so I have added that buzzer, and it works as a voltage alarm as well as a lost model alarm, and I have set the warning cell voltage at 3.4 and then the minimum cell voltage at 3.3 here. So RSSI is enabled, but that's not working, and there's also no current sensor. We don't have an on-screen display or anything like that. So coming down to the PID loop frequency, it's 1 kHz and 2 kHz. It was this out of the box, I haven't changed that. So scrolling down here, and then all this was just selected. I haven't changed anything here. So into the failsafe here, and it's set to drop. Into PID tuning, now I have just set a standard tune on here that I know is usually a good starting point, so I'll try that. Super rate I've bumped up to 0.8, and everything else here is stock. So the receiver is set to TAER for the channel map, so that's for the Taranis. And then if we go into the modes here, I have completely changed this, so I have got arming on auxiliary 1 on a 2-position switch, then I've got acro here on aux 2, and then angle over here, and then I've got acro and also air mode set up. I quite like this. It gives you the option of air mode and non-air mode and angle, and this I have copied from the Aurora series. Then I've got the beeper on the aux 3 there. So let's go into the motors tab. Now I needed to calibrate the ESCs out of the box. They were all completely wrong. So it is set up to have motor stop off, but when I armed the quadcopter, none of the motors were spinning. So you do need to calibrate the ESCs, and the way that you do that is tick this button here, move the master to full, plug your battery, and you'll get the magic tones, and then reduce the master to 0, and that will calibrate your ESCs. And then what I did was I individually moved these sliders up here to see where the motor idled, and it was pretty low, so I chose the value that is in the minimum throttle tab there. So let's go into the CLI, and I'll just show you the version number. It's not the latest one, but it's 3.15 there. So these ESCs do have BL Heli S installed on them, and I had to change the motor direction. I'm not sure if it's going to let me connect to them without the battery plugged in yet, so let me just quickly plug a battery in, and I'm going to be very careful here not to mess with any of the settings, and that's just so I can show you the direction. But I had to change motors 2 and 3. So it's going to read the setup, and you'll see that reversed and reversed on 2 and 3 there. So I'm going to very quickly unplug the battery before any props start to move. Okay, so I've got the battery connected here. There's actually a little foam pad that you stick on the underneath there, which I forgot to show you. So this is the Turnigy graphene battery, and this is actually the Maiden. So I've checked all the fail-safe and everything, and I'm just looking for a place on the ground. I am going to take off in angle mode, and I'm taking a step back here because if it flips or anything like that, then I want to make sure that I'm out of the way of it. Also got my finger on the arm switch as well. So let's go for a takeoff. It's very windy here today, but everything seems alright so far. It's hovering at about 20% throttle, so I think this one's gonna have a lot of punch. Yep, just a little tiny blip on the throttle and it just completely disappears into the atmosphere. Wow. Yeah, lots of power this one. I'm not hearing any flutters or anything like that. Kind of difficult today because it's so breezy. So, gone into acro there. This is acro and air mode. But I want to be careful really, because I don't want to crash it. The feeling that if I do, those wooden arms may break. Actually very quiet, this model. I think it might be those props though, a bit heavier than normal. It's getting blown around by this wind, but it's got plenty of power to combat that. Nice backflip there. Yeah, I think this is going to be alright. So I always do the maidens with the camera on, and that is because if I'm going to be flying with the camera on, then I want to make sure it's tuned with the camera on, because usually it's a slightly different tune without a camera. But I think this is alright. I think it's going to have a lot of power. Yeah, loads of power. Go for a punch again. Just disappears. Okay, I can hear the beeper going off there at the top of the throttle. So I think I'll bring it in for a landing, and then I can go and try some FPV with it. Before I do that though, in the time between doing the maiden line of sight and wanting to fly at FPV, the solder pads of the SMA connector had already started to lift. So I have decided to use that little pigtail connector that they gave, so I have soldered that on there. And then I put a cable tie around it because it wouldn't really fit anywhere else, and that is completely solid now. So that is my solution, and I think the cable tie will break if any of this hits the ground. And it's a really nice flyer, so I thought I'd spend the time doing the SMA adapter properly, because I really like how this one flies. So onto the FPV flight. So this flight is actually the FPV maiden, so I start out pretty slow, make sure that the video isn't cutting out, put it into a roll and see if all the controls are okay, and it was, and I just absolutely love how this thing flies. So this video transmitter is set at 25 milliwatts and the picture's still crystal clear, so I thought I would keep it at that. But of course you've got that button on there, so same as the UB130, if you long press the button you can change the different power output, and then it's like a 2-second press to change the different bands, and then a short press to change the channel. So yeah, and I was completely wrong about this being a quiet model as well. I think just because it's got so much power to weight ratio that when I was just flying it around line of sight at about 15 to 20% throttle, it sounded quiet. But as you can hear from this video, and also the video that I posted a day ago, it absolutely screams. I really like the sound of these motors, and I was kind of worried that this was going to be sort of like a beginner model, but it's not at all. It is a fully blown, fast racing quad. And yeah, I am impressed with it. It's a shame about the SMA connector, but I'm glad that they gave a little pigtail connector in there so that I could have some kind of solution. For me, that really is the only downside. That as well, and I think the fact that this is a really lightweight model because of the wood, I do think that those arms will snap. However, the arms are individual, so I guess you could get different arms for it and it not be too bad. I have to say, this is probably the quickest model I've ever built, and I think it's going to be more like that now with these all-in-one ESC boards. I was a little bit worried about those at first because, you know, ESCs, they do fail, but I've not had one of these all-in-ones fail on me yet. So of course you do have to replace the entire ESC board if one of them fails, but they are cheaper than buying individual ESCs anyways, and I just really like how quick it was to build. I liked how the motor wires were longer than usual, so you could clip them to length, and then that was just a couple of solder joins, and then it was just a case of going into Beat Al Hali Suite and just reversing the motors there on two of them. But yeah, fantastic model, incredible power. I think even this one may have more power than the Fury B Futon, which I still think is my favourite because it has the on-screen display. It's a little bit heavier, the Futon, but not by much. Like say, this one with the graphene battery I think was 507 grams, and the Futon with its on-screen display and everything came to 527 grams, so a little bit heavier. But anyway, there is my shop, build and flight video of the TS195. I'll put a link in the description if you wish to get one. As always, thanks so much for watching. Please continue to subscribe. Cheers.